cover incidents in Rainy Lake City, Koochiching County, Ranier, Kettle Falls, International Falls, Flanders, Ontario, and Rainy Lake. And most of the incidents that we do talk about contain what we call the three companions. That's alcohol, gambling, and prostitution. But there are other things as greed, anger, jealousy. They all add up. But I'm going to start off with Rainy Lake City. Several incidents in Rainy Lake City. Now, gold was discovered in Little American Mine in 1893. By 1894, Rainy Lake City was established. It was basically a normal town up north. It had a bank, a post office, jail, school, 13 saloons, and a population of about 500. Now, W.W. Butler from Duluth owned the bank. And on June 27, 1894, he announced publicly that the bank had been robbed. He promptly left town, supposedly to replenish the $5,000 that was taken in the robbery. But the residents, the depositors, became a little suspicious, and they went after him. Now, there's two variations to the story at this point. One is which that they caught him on the way to Tower, brought him back to Rainy Lake City with the $5,000. The other side, and it's as believable, he actually got to Tower, was able to replenish the supply, and then came back on his own. But either way, the depositors of the bank in Rainy Lake City forgave him because only two of them actually withdrew their money, and eventually they came back. But history has it that he actually did rob his own bank. The second incident now is 1901, when Rainy Lake City was really on its way out. Boomtown had gone away. And this incident happened on February 1st, 1901, very, very cold night. There was only one overnight establishment available for accommodations. It was called the Lake Shore House. And it was run by a despicable character by the name of Frank, or Spike, One-Armed Sullivan, described by Frank Lang as a no-good-for-nothing bum. But apparently it had a run-in with a good man, Bill Randolph from Kettle Falls. And Sullivan vowed to shoot Bill Randolph on sight. Randolph, like I said, a good man, had a contract to deliver mail by dog sled, and he was doing so on that particular evening. He needed a place to stay overnight. He entered the lake shore and immediately was shot twice by Sullivan with his revolver. One bullet took off part of his left ear, the other one hit him in the side. But Bill wasn't done. He had a shotgun along, and he dispatched Sullivan with one shot, and then immediately left for Fort Francis for medical attention for his injuries. He recovered quickly and then was arrested for manslaughter. He was tried in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids was the county seat at that time, and to everybody's dismay was found guilty of manslaughter. But when the judge found out that the jury had been receiving alcohol from the bailiff, he threw out the verdict. Randolph was retried and acquitted. Bill and his wife Kate then went on to found Borderland Lodge on Crane Lake, which was in existence until just a few years ago. Randolph Island on Namakan Lake is named after Bill, and Paddy Bay on Namakan Lake is named after his wife, Kate, who was Irish, and his nickname was Little Paddy. So, interesting bit of Namakan Lake trivia. 1907, Koochiching County was newly formed, and that's when it had its first murder. There's actually photos over here in the lodge that they set up. This happened just north of the Big Falls and Grand Falls. But James Gadet, 38 caliber revolver, killed Carlos Williams. No relation. And he turned himself in, and this is the version that he gave. That while at Carlos Williams' house, cabin, an argument, altercation broke out. Williams then threw an axe at him. Then he went inside and came out with a shotgun, shot at Gadet, shot high, missed. Gadet returned fire with 4 shots and killed Williams. And I say, then he turned himself in. But the trial that he was subjected to brought out things differently. The prosecution brought in witnesses, neighbors, that said that they heard 4 faint shots, like they came from a pistol, followed after a minute or 2 or 3, whatever, by a heavy blast from a shotgun. Just the opposite order of the version that Cadet gave. So apparently what Cadet did is he opened fire on Williams, killing him, went in the cabin, retrieved the shotgun, and fired a shot in the air. Wadding was found in the opposite direction. So it showed that the shot did not come in the direction that he indicated. Cadet was found guilty of murder and sentenced to a long jail term, still out of prison, Minnesota. Served 20 years and was released, and the story ends with him. Moving up to 1913, Ranier, this little town of Ranier, was a rough spot. It had a population of 200. It had 99 arrests. Yeah. In the first 6 months alone. But then in July, the worst incident maybe in Ranier's history happened. A grand jury was convened to look into the lawlessness that was existing in Ranier to see if there was something to be done about it. And Fred Koochiching, hotel operator and former mayor, had testified to that grand jury that as to the extent of the lawlessness here in Ranier. And this upset the saloon keepers, of course, and their patrons. He was called out by a group of men, a mob, that was severely beaten to the extent that he died a week later. And this happened in broad daylight in front of friends and family. And then, oddly enough, for whatever reason, no one was ever charged or convicted in that crime. Ashley?
So one of the things that was going on in 1916 is Koochiching County is moving to go dry. Prohibition goes national in 1920. So when Koochiching County votes dry, this really starts to set the stage for the city council, which then became known as the Saloon Gang Majority, because they wanted to create a defiance of higher authority to keep the town open. Most of the people that were involved in local politics had their fingers in owning saloons, or they were running gambling rings, or they owned brothels. And it was very well known that people like the mayor, Frank Keyes, had a particular business interest in keeping these illegal blind pigs open. But what he did to kind of keep the peace at the time is he closed everyone down except 4 places, and he happened to own all of them. And he turned those places, he referred to them as soft drink parlors. And so the Minnesota Public Safety Commission took an issue with this, and they took action against the city council for not enforcing these laws that were going across the county that were voted in by the constituents. And so they required that these parlors needed to be closed by 10 p.m., which was the same time that saloons needed to be closed in wet counties. So in 1917, the Public Safety Commission decides that they've really kind of had enough of Frank and of the mayor in Ranier, which was Peter Gibbons at the time, and the sheriff, which was Thomas White. So they went to the governor, and it was Governor Burnquist, and they requested that they would suspend all of these officials from their offices. And so they were officially suspended, and citizens were okay with this. But the one thing that they requested is that the people that were to come in after were not local citizens, because they felt that there were way too many people that were corrupt, that had an interest in wanting to keep all of these things going. So that's what they did. They did bring in a group of men that were not from the county. But what the governor did wasn't exactly legal either. So they ended up having to go through some court proceedings, and then in March of 1918, all of these men were then reinstated into their office under the stipulation that they had to kind of uphold the rules, the laws of, you know, of what the county had voted for. Of course, they don't do that because they don't care. They want to make money. But they were reinstated to uphold the laws at that time. It's back to you.
April 28th, 1921, the International Falls Press and Border Budget had the headline, "Booze Smuggler Shot and Killed." This happened right here, just several feet from where we're sitting tonight. Sheriff Van Etten, Deputy Hugh Reedy, had a tip that whiskey was going to be smuggled from Fort Francis, or the Canadian side, by small boat to a waiting automobile right here at the upper dock. And the two deputies waited at night for this to happen. I imagine they spent a lot of nights waiting where nothing happened, but sure enough, car backed down towards the lake, the dock. The canoe pulled up. The 3 cases of fine Canadian Scotch whiskey were put in the trunk of the car. So the 2 officers went out and made several arrests. Leonard Gillis and John McLaughlin. What's that? McLaughlin? I have a hard time saying that for some reason, but anyway. But before being handcuffed, John McLaughlin jumped back in the canoe and paddled off into the darkness. Deputy Reddy then pulled out his pistol, a 38 or 32 caliber revolver, fired 2 shots into the dock, and then 2 shots out into the lake, blind. The next morning, down by the Fort Francis paper mill in the boom logs, a mortally wounded McLaughlin was found with a bullet wound in his abdomen. He died a day later. The deputy really was surprised at hearing that this man was shot. He testified he did not mean to shoot him, that he was just firing warning shots. No charges were ever filed. But this is my opinion, and my opinion alone. It's possible that really with that small pistol couldn't have hit this guy in broad daylight with a box of shells, but just by firing a random shot or 2 out in the darkness, he killed him. This incident also happened in Ranier, 1922, in the winter. Jim Lazard, Albert Lazard, Pat Finnegan, and an unknown woman were sitting in Lazard's soft drink parlor. Now, I don't know if you've heard really of soft drink parlors, but they didn't necessarily sell soft drinks. In fact, Billy Noonan from the Vedette region made the statement that a police officer in International Falls fell dead of shock because he was raiding a soft drink parlor and they were actually serving soft drinks. But an unknown man with a large caliber pistol, a .45, entered the establishment. Just the 4 of them there, sitting. And Finnegan asked him, he says, "What are you doing with the gun?" And the reply from this guy was, "Well, perhaps you'd like some of it." He then shot Finnegan right in the chest and killed him instantly. Then fired 2 shots into the upper body of Jim Lazard, stepped over the 2 fallen men. Albert Lazard and the unknown woman were not hurt. He stepped over the 2 men on the floor, robbed the till of $29, and then took off east, leaving tracks in the snow. Sheriff Reedy at that time followed him easily. The guy was intoxicated, followed his tracks in the snow. By that time he was unarmed, he ditched a pistol, and then was charged with murder. That is also mentioned on some photos up here. He was later identified as James Conroy. But oddly enough, Jim Lazard, even though that both lungs were damaged with that, the .45 is one hell of a round, but both lungs damaged, he lived, which is literally a miracle. And he's the same Jim Lazard that tended to be elderly here in Ranier. Well, most of us knew Butch Lazard, Butch's uncle. But my dad told me years later, in visiting with Dr. Craig, who attended to Lazard with his injuries, said that Jim's heart was in a contraction stage. One bullet went through that if it was in the expansion part, it would have tore into it and would have killed him instantly. But very lucky, very strong man, but very, very lucky. Kettle Falls.
Oh my God, really?
Oh, it's Van Etten. We're doing Van Etten.
So this also happened in 1922. It was September 18th. Sheriff Van Etten, City Patrolman McMicken, and William Carpenter, they set out to arrest two men by the name of Joe Beauchamp and John Nigro. And I think that this is a really silly crime. They were passing forged checks at local clothing stores, at the Burton store and the Markowitz store. And Nigro had stolen the checks from a foreigner, and then he had decided to forge them. So Van Etten gets word that Nigro is hiding out at Joe Beauchamp's shack, which was on the outskirts of town near the MD&W railroad yards. Now the officers arrive at the shack and they demand for these men to come out, and the men refuse. So at that time, the officers attempt to force entry into the cabin, and Beauchamp fires twice through the door. One bullet ends up striking Van Etten in the left leg, and then the second one penetrates McMicken's leg, shatters his bone, and it also strikes a major artery. Van Etten kind of stumbles around the side of the building, and he tells Carpenter to run and get help. Now, at this time in 1922, there is no radio, there's no two-way radio, there's no way for them to communicate, so he literally has to run and go find someone to help them. Now a posse is formed of local men, and this is what I think is crazy. They form a posse, and these wounded men are rushed to the hospital. And so on September 19th at 10:20, after 24 hours, McMicken dies from his injuries. Now, two members of the posse notice life in a shack out near French Addition early Tuesday morning, and they go to investigate, and they find a man in there who ends up being Beauchamp, but they don't recognize him at first. And so Beauchamp tells these guys that he's just waiting for a friend, they're gonna go hunting. So they leave and they get a little bit away, and they're like, you know what? I don't think so. And so he ends up getting away, and Deputy Reedy takes a posse into the swamps. And now you have 400 or 500 men with guns in the woods. The noon whistle blows and they start out. And this is what I think is really terrifying, because you have people out there, like, you have to hope everyone there is your friend at this point, because they're all armed. At 12:30, Beauchamp is seen. He's ordered to halt. He keeps running. He gets about 200 feet. He shoots a few shots, and then finally the posse starts returning fire. I mean, 400 or 500 people shooting guns in one direction. That's scary. They don't think that they hit him, but they don't think that they hit him. But they walk up and they start investigating, and they find him dying in the bushes, and he's found with a .40 and a lot of ammunition and about a quart bottle of moonshine. And so they still haven't found Nigro yet. He's still missing. So at 6 a.m. on September 20th, this guy enters the hotel in Ericsburg, and he's really nervous, he's kind of disheveled. And a lumberman by the name of E.E. Scott is really suspicious of this guy. And so he notifies the owner of the hotel of his suspicions. And so they go back downstairs, the guy is gone, and they tail him over to a store where he's buying shoes. Because this guy's an idiot, he's buying shoes with the forged checks.
Wait. Is he buying shoes in Ericsburg?
Yep.
Yep.
They had a hotel too.
So he was unarmed, and he did surrender willingly, and he confessed to the crime and said that Beauchamp had jumped out the window, and he never saw his friend again after that point. And he was convicted and imprisoned. On September 29th, 1922, at 8:30 a.m., Sheriff Hughes Van Etten did suffer hemorrhages, and he ended up passing away from his injuries, and he did leave his wife and one child behind, and he was 41 years old. He only served as sheriff for 2 years during that time.
So was Niagara convicted of the forged check?
He was convicted for both.
I grew up in French Edition, and that there was a log cabin in back of the Alverson's house, which I think is the very cabin that he took refuge in. I remember it as a kid. It's all rotted away now, but we always thought it was Mustang Hanson's first cabin. Until he builds a house.
Well, we're back to Ranier. July of 1926, a body was found floating in the water here at the lower dock. And it was ID'd as Norbert Flett of Fort Francis. He was last seen a week or so earlier with $15 in his pocket and on his way to Ranier. But the death was suspicious. He had both a broken neck and a broken leg. But the question was asked, did he get by a train when he was coming across the trestle here, or was he assaulted and killed? I guess we'll never know. But interesting that the editor of the Fort Francis Times at the time editorialized it and said, and I'll quote, "Ranier is a good place to stay away from."
So I have two more events that happened in 1926. One is the unsolved murder of Jack Ryan. It was either at the beginning of March or the end of February. They're really not quite sure. It wasn't reported until the March 4th paper. But Jack Ryan, he had a trading post at Kettle Falls, and he was found murdered and his body was left in the woods near his store. He was found with a bullet hole in his head and also in his abdomen. And they also found the back of his head was also crushed, likely from a blow with a heavy object. It was reported that Jack had been in International Falls in Ranier selling a large amount of furs. So when he had left, he likely had a large sum of money on him. When his body was found, the money was not found on his person. Jack Ryan was well liked by everyone that he knew, so that's why they felt that his murder was motivated by money. And this is a case that still remains unsolved today. They still have no idea what happened to him. And the last story that I have for you is from Craigville. Craigville was kind of a bad little town. And this happens in April of 1926. This was the Cunningham versus McGinty shootout. It was very much an Old West type of situation.
Can you tell us where Craigville was?
Right.
So Craigville is down by like the North Home area.
Straight north of Effie.
Yes.
It's not the Flat
Does it
Town.
still exist?
No.
It's not Flat Town.
That's on
6 miles north of Effie.
Yes. So McGinty and Cunningham, they were two saloon keepers, and they greatly disliked each other. And they decided that they had a score to settle. They were both chasing after the same woman. She was a dancing girl from a place called Jimmy's Pool Hall. And McGinty was known to be the baddest man that ever lived in Craigville. And he always carried a revolver in his pocket. McGinty was also a pretty strong guy. He was said to be a heavyweight wrestler. He liked to get into physical altercations. He weighed about 220 pounds. Cunningham was a large man, but he didn't like to fight. And so when McGinty confronted Cunningham and, said, "Hey, you want to duke it out?" Cunningham was like, "I'm too fat to fight. Let's just pull out our guns." So McGinty had a big .45, and he took out his gun and he shot Cunningham 4 times, but he didn't kill him. So Cunningham draws and he shot McGinty 1 time and he shot him right in the heart. And so after he killed him, McGinty got drug out to the ice house, a building where they kept blocks of ice in. Not like an ice house where you go fishing, because there's not that happening in Craigville. So they drug him out into the ice house and they left him there until the sheriff came, which was about 4 or 5 days later, because the sheriff didn't like to go to Craigville because it was that bad. Cunningham was laid up with an abdominal wound, and a young doctor arrived and examined him and was like, "No, you're probably going to die. I can't help you." And then there was a gentleman that worked at a store across the street called the Norcross store, and he had trained as a nurse, and he went over and he kind of ascertained the situation. He said, "You know, we can actually probably save you." And so they, Cunningham's friends rallied up a bunch of funds, and they transported him on a railway gas car and made a trip to Grand Rapids where he was treated. And he did end up surviving from this altercation with McGinty, and he did serve time for McGinty's murder.
Well, now I'm going to talk.
Oh, we have you here next, yes. No, it's you. It's you.
We're gonna talk about probably the most heinous crime maybe ever committed in the borderland area. And some information on that is also over here. 1944 in Flanders. It's upstream of us here, and I believe it's on the same river system. It's an abandoned community now. But it was widely publicized as the hot stove murder. 4 young men, William Schmidt, 28, George Sprybeck, 28, Anthony Sprybeck, 23, and Eno Tillenden, 23, boarded the train in Fort Francis. The destination was the Flanders area, east, and they were going to go to the home of Mrs. Violet Jameson. And the purpose of the trip, of course, was to rob her. They heard a rumor about how much this poor woman, how much cash that she had. That she wasn't home when they arrived. A little bit later, she showed up with her 2 young sons. They immediately put a sheet over her head, locked the 2 boys in a root cellar. They then started questioning her about where the money was. And the questioning became more and more violent. They burned her with flaming newspapers. And then they placed her on her hot cook stove. There was no money, so there's no money was found. One of the boys eventually escaped from the root cellar and ran to get help. 4 young fellas then from the fort got scared and took off. The son found George Armstrong. I know a lot of us here knew George Armstrong from Fort Francis. He was a young man at that time and was working in the Flanders area. And he came to Mrs. Jameson's aid. And the alarm then was sounded. And I'd like to read just a couple of paragraphs here, and I'll quote them exactly from the Fort Francis Times, dated the 22nd of June, 1944. And the header is District's Worst Crime. And I quote, as I said, "The very thought of 3 men picking up a small woman and laying her on a hot stove to force her to give them information so that they may steal which little money she may have is almost beyond believing. It is difficult even to imagine that there is running around in our district men, no, not men, male human beings whose minds are so warped as to entertain any such act." I'm plugged to say, remember, World War II is going on. "We realize the Nazi mind capable of similar crimes, but it's jokingly shocking in our consciousness to believe that such acts could be considered in this Canada of ours." Viola Jameson died on July 2nd of that year, 1944. And by that time, the 4 perpetrators had been arrested, were jailed in Fort Francis on the charge of murder. At that time, Canada had capital punishment, and they faced the death penalty if convicted. And the trial was held in Fort Francis, and 3 of them, William Schmidt and the Sprybeck brothers, were found guilty of murder. Eno Tillenden, who was the lookout, younger fellow, got a lesser conviction. The judge ordered Schmidt and the Sprybecks to be hanged by the neck until dead, and this would take place on December 6th. Gallows were put up inside the Fort Francis jail. The windows were covered with black blankets, and a grave right on the Fort Francis jail property was dug. It would not be a public hanging, of course. But however, to the relief of the 3 murderers, the stay of execution was granted until March 1st. I guess the they were elated over it, but reality set in. Meanwhile, Tillenden was off to a life imprisonment at Stony Mountain, where he served a few years, but was released on good behavior, and eventually became a father and grandfather, turned into a good man. But not the case with the other three. On March 1st, the three of them met their fate on the gallows, midnight, at the Fort Francis jail. Like I said before, the Fort Francis Times called this the worst crime, in the district's history. I think it remains that to this day. But Byrne is up next year with a more recent story.
One addition to Mike's story, I understand that was the last public execution in Canada. So Fort Francis has that honor. I take a bit of a jump in time. I'm now up to 1963, when one of the famous guides on Rainy Lake, Happy Heath, was guiding out of James Anderson's Glenatron Lodge. And he and my father were pretty good friends. My father's coming down the lake with a cruiser from the houseboat, and he's got the radio on, and he picks up the little snippets of sound from the radio, nowhere near the kind of service, either transmission or reception that you have today. And he got these words close together, Heath and shooting. And he said immediately his mind went back to the week before. He had met Pappy on the street in the falls. And Pappy said, "Don," in Southern Kentucky drawl, said, "Don, you ever get a bass fisherman who just can't cast a fly?" I said, "Oh yeah, I get one sometimes." Pappy said, "I had one last week, I want to kill him." And Dad said, "Oh God, some poor bass fisherman just couldn't cast a fly." But that wasn't it. What Pappy was shooting at was a posse of 13 men who had come to raid his Slurpers Island, because there had been reports of an altercation with a guest at Glenatron, but also the fact that there were a number of drunken ducks. Pappy, of course, had been a moonshiner for years and years. And in fact, it was interesting, in one of the reports it says that they had been kind of keeping an eye on him for the last 8 years. And I assume that if you're looking for somebody for 8 years, you're not trying real hard.
He made good hooch.
That's the word, and that it was, when they did raid his still, well, when they came up first to check on him, he fired 13 shots, and there were 13 members in the posse, and somebody said that he got back to write the report, and word is if he was really trying, there wouldn't have been anybody left to write the report. But he had been making moonshine, and after he was caught, he had several interesting comments. One is, "I'm glad this is over. Now I can go on the wagon." They caught him with 35 gallons of homemade whiskey. He said he made it 2 to 4 gallons at a time, but that amounts to a lot more than he'd make in 8 years. Anyway, he was arrested at that time, and then I have this strange problem in doing this story, that he disappears. I don't find anything on where he was sentenced or what the outcome of that was, because in 1970 he did go down to Chisago County, and killed a man who run off with Pappy's common-law wife, and apparently was mistreating him. But Pappy and the courts down there let him go home to sell his property to raise funds. He came back up here to sell Surfers Island, was here for a while and disappeared and was gone. Most people thought he'd either drowned or died. He was having some serious heart problems. Turns out he had gone to Oregon and lived there for 4 years. The FBI finally caught up with him there, brought him home, and he was sent to Chisago City, Chisago County, and tried on the shooting crime, and ended up spending a couple years in jail, and then came back up here. But it was when they caught him, one of the interesting things in the news reports was the amount of detail that he was giving the police and the authorities on the art of making moonshine.
And it was good.
And the moonshine was good, and
Absolutely.
and the instructions are available. The complete instructions are written in the Ring Lake Chronicle. And got the dates.
And his rig is in the basement, right, Ed?
Yeah, we got part of the equipment went up in the museum. He was probably as colorful a character.
The barrel skull.
Pardon?
The barrel skull.
Unfortunately, they weren't.
Empty. That's too bad.
On the addendum here, I have actually sipped a shot glass out of one of his bottles, and it's still very, very
Still
good.
very good. Yeah, there was a rumor, and the fact that I called it a rumor probably wasn't true. But one of the revenuers who had checked up on him earlier, he had taken him out and given him a drink, and the revenue wanted to go in business with him. In 1978, then, Pappy did get back up here, in 77, 78, spent a couple of years, and died peacefully. The other person that I'm reporting on is not very much high crime or misdemeanors, but it was one of the better manhunts in this area. My father had left our island with Tim Banks, one of our guides, to run an errand, and as he was doing that, an airplane swooped down low and chased a boat up on shore on Stop Island, which is, you probably all know where Stop Island is, and on the north side of the island. And it turns out that a man named Art Strand, a Canadian, had been on the loose and breaking into cabins, stealing things, including guns, among other things, doing all kinds of nonsense, kind of mischief. And doing things like cutting telephone lines, tearing things apart, breaking windows, take a shovel and break windows out of the cabin. Just nonsense. But enough of a nuisance that the OPP on the Canadian side had caught up with them, chased him by plane. He went to shore on Stop Island. My father and Jim Banks went back, and they went around the island in two different directions with one of the police officers and took every boat off of Stop Island, dumped that out in the lake so that Art would not be able to get off. So now they got them, They've got them on about 110-acre island, which is not very tight. And the manhunt began. This is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and by evening, the island was surrounded by boats. There were police officials from the county, the city. There were no Ranier police involved.
I wonder why.
They knew better. But they circled the island, anchored houseboats off the points of the island so we would not be able to swim or take a raft to get to shore. And he was there for 41 hours before they finally found him asleep in a bed in Ray Bird's cabin on the north side of the island. They brought him back. The base of operations for that manhunt was my family's island, Norway Island, and they had about 40 people in the search crew there for the full 2 days. Raining, snowing, poor Art strand out sleeping under logs for a couple of nights. And anyway, when they did catch up with him, he came in peacefully. One of the police officers had said to my parents, they just knew that when they saw him, they were going to shoot him. Because they assumed he was armed. He wasn't, but they assumed he had definitely stolen guns. And you do not like to be hunting for a desperate person and not be ready to shoot. But after they got him, he was wet with the dragglers, and they brought him in, gave him food, got him ready to leave. And as he was going off the door, the island, of course, was covered with news reporters. As they were getting ready to go out the door, my father said to the police officer, "Why don't you let him wear your hat and coat?" Which they did. So he went out dressed as an OPP officer, and I was able to get off the island without being harassed anymore than he was. After this event, they went around the island and put all the boats back. But Art ended up going through evaluation and was sent off for some time to the home for the bewildered.
We'll all go there eventually.
You know, when Ashley was talking about Frank Keyes as mayor of International Falls closing down the competition, I thought of something that happened to me. I'm sure all of you remember the day that demand camp. I didn't know what was going on. I was guiding fishermen down on the east end of the lake, and I got a message, call over the radio from Bill Elliott, who was the sheriff in Koochiching County at the time, that they wanted all the liquor establishments closed in Koochiching County, including, you know, City of International Falls, Little Fork, Island View, meaning Thunderbird, Shea, Rain Lake Lodge. And, but anyway, I said, sure, you know, go ahead, close them down. Mary and I had Thunderbird at the time, of course. So anyway, I came in at the dock at the usual time at 5 o'clock. Thunderbird was incredibly busy. Parking lot was full, people were out on the deck. And I talked to a guy, he says, "What's going on?" He says, "This is the only joint in the whole area that's open." Ellie had assumed that I would call it Thunderbird. I assumed he would. But to this day, it's the busiest afternoon bar business that the place has ever had. Well, we pretty much done unless somebody else has had questions or.
I have a question.
Okay, Jeff Hardwick has got a question.
Actually, the last story told was about a man who took 4 bullets in the chest, returned fire, shot a man in the heart, and then got charged for murder. I don't get that.
No, what incident are you talking about? With Ashley?
Yeah, Craig took 4 bullets to the chest, returns fire, shoots him in the heart, and then he gets charged with murder. Did I hear that?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
I don't get it. Why is that not self-defense?
Who shot first?
Yeah, so McGinty took out his gun and shot Cunningham about 4 times, but he didn't kill him. And so Cunningham drew his gun, and he shot McGinty once, and he shot McGinty in the heart and killed him. So Cunningham served time for the murder of McGinty. I suppose because I mean technically he really murdered him, and it was a shootout. This was an agreed thing, you know. They kind of were like,
Oh, I have to actually agreed to shoot at each other.
yeah, because they were they were basically entering a duel situation. Yeah, McGinty had asked Cunningham if he would physically wrestle with him, and Cunningham said, "Nope, I'm too fat for that. Let's just shoot with our guns."
Oh, okay, that's
Okay,
So
I need to testify here.
Hold up, Rick. Let's get you a microphone.
Oh, well, give me a mic. You know.
I don't know if Rick needs one.
When I came back from Vietnam in 1971, I stayed in the Keys Hotel, which was right across from the bar. Oh, there we go. All right, when I came back, I ended up in the Keys building, which was no longer there, parking, right? But as I remember, my apartment had frosted windows facing the hallway and radiators that were in the hallway. So lumberjacks would come in and negotiate with the prostitutes. But there were Persian rugs on the floors. My apartment had a little kitchenette sort of thing, and a living room sort of thing, and a bedroom, a crib, as you would describe it from a prostitution perspective. But the entire building was nothing but a whorehouse. And below it, there were mercantile stores, you know. But I just, I worked over at the community college running the radio station. I'd get off at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I would come in to my second floor hallway with Persian rugs. But there was about 30 Native Americans sleeping on the floor. And when I had some, you know, pork chops or whatever, I'd put them on a plate and put it out in the hallway. And the next morning, there'd be a raven's claw or a wing, you know, thanking me for my contribution. But anyway, Old Man Keys made a lot of money off of prostitution. And I mean, he's you know, a guiding force of our society, but he built a hell of a building.
Do you disagree with that?
Did you want me to mention?
Was that called the Keys Arcade?
No, that burned years before. The Keys Arcade is where the Northern Lumber is.
I read that story on I grew up with a story that Lori Neal was the last one behind me. I found all there that the priest.
I know that capital punishment.
Do you remember that?
Capital punishment ended in Canada shortly after Triple Hagen.
Is my memory wrong? Am I inaccurate yet? Yes. Am I inaccurate?
About what? About the Keys building. You're right about the Keys building. That was just one of many in the fall.
Mine is just Maya with you. I'm sure they still have them. So recent? Yeah, I think it was a couple years ago. Yeah.
Just a reminder that we do still have those t-shirts available. I can bring the boxes out and bring them up front if people are interested in t-shirts or sweatshirts. And we still have our lovely jar up front as